She had been waiting for 3 days, not for flowers, not for a grand gesture, not for anything complicated. Just 2 words. I'm sorry. That's all she needed. The argument was over something small, a canceled dinner, a dismissive comment, a moment where she felt completely invisible to the person who was supposed to see her most clearly. She didn't need him to be perfect. She just needed him to acknowledge that something happened, that she'd been hurt, that it mattered. But he never said it. Instead, he acted like the argument hadn't occurred. He came home the next evening and asked what she wanted for dinner. He sent her a funny video. The following morning, he bought her coffee without being asked. He was being kind, genuinely kind, in every way, except the one way she actually needed. And here is what made the situation truly unsettling. He wasn't doing it to punish her. He wasn't doing it because he didn't care. He was doing it because somewhere in the architecture of his psychology, an apology was not something he was capable of giving, not to her, not to anyone, not without something inside him, breaking completely, and neither of them understood why. That is what we are going to examine today. Welcome to Dr. Cole's Dark Psychology. I'm Dr. Evan Cole, behavioral psychologist and behavioral analyst. Every video on this channel takes a pattern of human behavior that most people have experienced but never had explained to them and examines it at the level it actually operates, not the surface, not the symptom, the mechanism underneath. Today, we are going to talk about one of the most quietly devastating patterns in close relationships. Why some people simply cannot say sorry. Not, will not, but cannot. That distinction between unwillingness and psychological inability is the entire center of this video. And by the time we're done, I think you will understand someone in your life in a way you haven't before, possibly yourself. Let's get into it. When someone refuses to apologize after hurting us, we almost always reach for the same explanation. They don't care. It is the most natural conclusion in the world. If you cared about me, you would see that you hurt me. If you saw that you hurt me, you would say something. The silence, the absence of the apology reads as evidence of indifference. And sometimes that is true, but in a very significant number of cases, particularly in long-term relationships, in marriages, in family dynamics, it isn't the real explanation at all. The person who cannot apologize is not always indifferent to your pain. In many cases, they are acutely aware of it. They lie awake thinking about it. They replay the argument. They feel something, guilt, discomfort, an unnamed weight that doesn't leave. They can see that you are hurting, and they still cannot say the words. That is not indifference. That is something far more complicated. And understanding what it actually is will change how you see this pattern entirely. To understand why some people cannot apologize, you first need to understand what an apology actually requires, neurologically and psychologically. On the surface, an apology seems simple. You did something wrong, you acknowledge it, you express regret, you move forward. But that sequence, as simple as it sounds, requires the brain to complete a task that some psychological architectures find genuinely threatening. Acknowledging that you did something wrong requires you to hold, simultaneously, 2 ideas about yourself. 1, I am a person who caused harm. 2, I am still fundamentally a good person. For most people, that tension is uncomfortable but manageable. They feel guilt, they apologize, and the guilt releases. The apology is actually a relief mechanism. It restores the sense of self. But for a specific category of people, and these are people who often appear confident, even dominant in their relationships, that tension cannot be held. For them, the acknowledgement of fault does not feel like a temporary discomfort. It feels like the collapse of everything because their entire sense of self is not built on the foundation of being a good person who sometimes makes mistakes. It is built on the foundation of being a person who does not make mistakes at all. Psychologists call this a brittle self-concept, and it is far more common in intimate relationships than most people realize. No one is born unable to apologize. The inability is constructed, usually early, usually in an environment that, without any malicious intent, taught a child a very specific and very damaging lesson. In some households, mistakes are not treated as events. They're treated as verdicts. You didn't spill something. You are careless. You didn't fail a test. You are stupid. You didn't make a bad choice. You are a bad kid. The error and the identity of the child become fused. Every mistake is not something that happened. It is something that reveals what you fundamentally are. A child raised in that environment learns to survive by building a wall between their sense of self and the possibility of being wrong. Because being wrong in that environment means being worthless. It means being fundamentally unlovable. So they stop being wrong, not by becoming perfect, but by psychologically restructuring their perception of events so that they are never the one at fault. The error always belongs elsewhere. The blame always finds another address, and they carry that structure into every relationship they will ever have. By the time they're an adult standing in front of the person they love most, after an argument they know somewhere beneath the wall they contributed to, the apology is not just difficult, it is existentially terrifying. Because to say I was wrong is to their nervous system the equivalent of saying I am worthless, and the brain will not allow that sentence to be completed. This psychological mechanism expresses itself in relationships in three very recognizable patterns. You have almost certainly seen at least one of them. The first pattern is deflection. Instead of apologizing, the person pivots. They acknowledge the conflict but immediately redirect responsibility. I'm sorry you feel that way. I'm sorry things got so heated. These sentences have the structural shape of an apology without any of the substance. There is no acknowledgement of fault, no ownership of a specific action. The word sorry appears, but it is aimed at the situation, not at what they did within it. People who use this pattern often genuinely believe they are apologizing. From the inside, it feels like an apology. They said the word. They addressed the conflict. To them, the case is closed. To you, nothing happened. That gap between what they believe they offered and what you actually received, a quietly maddening dynamics in a close relationship. The second pattern is counter-accusation. Instead of moving toward an apology, the person responds to being hurt by surfacing a grievance of their own. Suddenly the conversation is no longer about what they did. It is about what you did last month, or the way you raised your voice, or a pattern they've noticed in your behavior. This is not always a deliberate strategy. For many people, it is purely instinctive. A survival response triggered the moment the self is under threat. The brain scans rapidly for any available evidence that the other person is also at fault and deploys it immediately. Because if you're also wrong, then they are not uniquely wrong. And if they are not uniquely wrong, the wall stays standing. The third pattern is the most confusing one. Repair without acknowledgement. The person does not apologize, but they act well, they become kind, attentive, generous, they buy the coffee, they send the funny video, they are present in every way except the one that would actually resolve the wound. This is the pattern that leaves the hurt person most disoriented. Because how do you stay angry at someone who is being kind to you, and yet the kindness is doing nothing for the specific pain you're carrying? Because the specific pain needs acknowledgement, not gestures. What this person is doing, without knowing it, is offering repair while avoiding the cost of repair. They want the relationship restored. They genuinely do. But they want it restored without having to pass through the door of accountability, so they try to rebuild the warmth around the wound, hoping that enough warmth will eventually make the wound irrelevant. It never does. I want to spend a moment on the other side of this dynamic, because the person waiting for an apology that never comes goes through something that deserves to be named clearly. At first, it is confusion. You replay the argument trying to understand if you misread it. Maybe it wasn't as serious as you thought. Maybe you're being too sensitive. The absence of an apology makes you question your own perception of what happened. That questioning is not weakness. It is a natural response to a confusing situation, but it has a cost. Because while you are questioning your perception, your own emotional reality is going unvalidated. You are essentially doing the work of convincing yourself that your pain is less real than it was. And then comes the bargaining. You tell yourself that they show love differently, that the coffee means they're sorry, even if they can't say it. You work very hard to translate their actions into the language you actually needed to hear. And sometimes that translation is enough for a while, but over months, over years, over dozens of unacknowledged moments that accumulate silently in the space between you, the distance grows, not from one catastrophic failure, but from the quiet, repeated experience of being hurt and having that hurt go unseen, of needing to be known and instead being managed. Research in relationship psychology, particularly the work of Dr. John Gottman at the University of Washington, shows that what erodes long-term relationship satisfaction most reliably is not the presence of conflict. It is the failure of repair after conflict. Couples who fight and repair stay together. Couples who fight and never repair, even when the fighting is mild and infrequent, quietly dissolve. The apology is not a small thing. It is the mechanism that tells the other person, your pain is real. I see it, and I care more about you than I care about protecting myself. When that mechanism is absent consistently across years, the relationship does not end in a single dramatic moment. It ends in the slow, accumulated weight of feeling alone inside a partnership. There's a question that almost never gets asked in this dynamic, and I think it is the most important one. Does the person who cannot apologize know what they are doing? In most cases, and this is the part that is genuinely difficult to sit with, the answer is no. Not fully. They know the argument happened. They know there is tension. They sense at some level that something is owed, but the moment the brain approaches the territory of full acknowledgement, of saying clearly and without deflection, I hurt you and I was wrong, an internal system activates that redirects the thought before it can complete itself. This is not a conscious strategy. It is a deeply conditioned psychological reflex. Decades old, built before the person had any awareness of what they were building. They are not, in most cases, sitting quietly and thinking about how to avoid accountability. They are simply living inside a version of events in which they are not as wrong as you believe they are. Their perception of the conflict is genuinely different from yours, not because they are lying, but because the brain has edited the record to protect the self. Psychologists call this cognitive dissonance resolution. When two pieces of information cannot coexist, I did something wrong and I am a good person, the brain resolves the tension by adjusting one of them. In most people, the behavior is adjusted. I did something wrong, so I should fix it. In people with a brittle self-concept, the perception of the event is adjusted instead. I didn't really do anything wrong, so there is nothing to fix. And they believe it. That is what makes this so difficult for partners, for family members, for anyone in close proximity to this pattern. You are not dealing with someone who knows the truth and is hiding it. You are dealing with someone who has genuinely lost access to it. People ask me this, and they deserve an honest answer. Can someone who has never been able to apologize learn to do it? Yes. But not through pressure, not through ultimatums, not through making the argument more intense until the apology finally breaks through. Those approaches do not work because they increase the threat to the self, and the higher the threat, the more rigidly the defenses hold. What actually works is slower and less satisfying in the short term. It works when the person themselves begins to see that the wall they have built is costing them more than it is protecting them. When the relationships they value most start showing visible damage that they can no longer attribute entirely to someone else. When the gap between who they believe they are and how they are being experienced by the people who know them best becomes too large to manage. Some people arrive at that recognition through therapy, where a skilled clinician can safely dismantle the connection between error and worthlessness that was forged in childhood. Some arrive at it through loss, the departure of someone who mattered enough to produce genuine grief. And in that grief, finally, an honest accounting. And some, a smaller number, arrive at it through a single conversation, not a fight, not an ultimatum, a quiet, honest conversation where someone who loves them says, without anger, I don't need you to be perfect. I just need you to be here with me when things go wrong. I need to know that my pain is real to you. Sometimes that is enough to reach something underneath the wall. Not always, but sometimes. If you are waiting for an apology that hasn't come, understand that the silence may not be telling you what you think it is. It may not be saying that you don't matter. It may be saying, I don't know how to matter to you without losing myself in the process. That does not mean you should accept behavior that consistently harms you. That does not mean the relationship is salvageable in every case. And it absolutely does not mean your pain is less real because the other person can't see it into your. It means that some of the most painful patterns in human relationships are not the result of cruelty. They are the result of damage that was done long before you arrived. Understanding that won't fix everything. It changes what the silence means, and sometimes that change is the beginning of something. If you are waiting for an apology that hasn't come, understand that the silence may not be telling you what you think it is. It may not be saying that you don't matter. It may be saying, I don't know how to matter to you without losing myself in the process. That does not mean you should accept behavior that consistently harms you. That does not mean the relationship is salvageable in every case. And it absolutely does not mean your pain is less real because the other person can't see it into your. It means that some of the most painful patterns in human relationships are not the result of cruelty. They are the result of damage that was done long before you arrived. Understanding that won't fix everything. It changes what the silence means, and sometimes that change is the beginning of something. If this gave you a moment of recognition about someone you love, about a pattern you've lived inside, maybe about something in yourself that you've never quite had the language for, then you're exactly where this channel is meant to be. Subscribe to Dr. Cole's Dark Psychology. Every week, we go beneath the surface of human behavior, into the psychology that drives what people do when they are afraid, when they are guilty, when they are under pressure, and when they are trying to protect something inside themselves they don't even know is there. No tricks, no shortcuts, just the science underneath the behavior.